Good morning, and next we'll welcome Søren Kottal from senior developer from Acrio, here based in Odense, and he'll be talking about Alpine Js. I believe it's a really lightweight JavaScript framework which ties in well with Umbraco. So give it up for Søren.
Thanks. Let's just get the screens on. So, Alpine Js, I call it the easy way to add interactivity to your Umbraco site. Could be any else site, just this is Umbraco conference. So, first a little thing about me. My name is Søren, as Tony said. I'm a tech lead at Acrio. I've been an Umbraco MVP since 2019, and I'm passionately curious about all things web. I work primarily on the front end, but I do my share of back-end development too, so you could call me a full stack developer, if only you know what the stack is. So, at Acrio, we love working with Umbraco. As Alan Kay says it, simple things should be simple, complex things should be possible. And building CMS-driven websites should be simple. We should have taken care of most of the things we needed. And that's for routing. We have in Umbraco, we have automated routing between pages. And when we need something complex or out of the box, then it's easy to get going and it's well documented. We have a templating language in Razor that works for pretty much everything you need, and you can do all kinds of cool stuff and all kinds of stuff that you shouldn't do also. And we get the extensibility both on the front end and the back end to do whatever we need to cater for our clients' needs. So for interactivity on websites, we've been at the most places. Like everyone else in this industry the past 20 years, we've tried jQuery with the do more and write less and do more approach. Worked really well, probably still do, but most times it ended up in a huge JS file with a mess of all kinds of code. We've also tried MVC-like frameworks like AngularJS and Vue and all those. Haven't tried React, but I guess it's probably the same. And they are really nice, but they also come with a huge payload for your pages. So most of the times we often opted for simple vanilla JS. The most typical things that we needed to do was to toggle a class here and there and show a div whenever something got clicked. So when doing vanilla JS in your projects and doing all the big frameworks, you end up with problems when you're in teams and you're doing projects differently every time. So coding styles differ from person to person. And while you can lint your way out of most of it, then you can't lint your way out of how people approach things. So we need a way to have some kind of a similar approach across projects, and we need a good way of documenting things. And if we could get a lot of documentation for free, then that would be perfect, because even if there is any documentation, it's often outdated or not at all covering the things that it needs. So our journey started by going utility first on our CSS. And utility first is the methodology where you add tons of classes to your HTML, and it looks very ugly. But we did it using Tailwind CSS. It made us a hell of a lot more effective when writing designs in our pages. The basics of it is that you configure your design tokens, and then you get a bunch of CSS classes that you can combine and mix in your markup to make the design that you need. You don't get any finished components or anything. You simply just compose whatever things should look like. So the best thing about Tailwind is that we get a well-documented coding style, because Tailwind comes with an awesome documentation site that actually shows how everything is supposed to do. And as long as we steer pretty close to the default configs, then we can use that as a documentation for all our sites. In addition to that, the CSS output is extremely optimized. It works by looking at all your markup files and only generates the classes that you actually need. So where we before had CSS files above 200 kilobytes, now we struggle to get them above 50. So it's insanely effective. So back to JavaScript, that's what we're here for today. So we had already did jQuery for doing these kinds of interactivity. And I felt that Vue and all their friends were too big for these simple stuff where we need to just toggle classes, show divs, stuff like that. So the problem with those are that they come with a lot of complexity. For instance, the single file components in Vue, they are great. I love working with them, and it really makes a great developer experience. But we have to compile them every time, and we need some boilerplate code to tell Vue where to find the components to. And on top of that, it moves all the markup and styles to our JS bundle. And that's often not a good idea, because then Google came up with this Core Web Vitals, which is Google's way of knowing how performant a website is. And it does by measuring how fast it can show the page, how long it takes before the user can actually use it, and how much of reordering and jank and all that is happening when loading the page. And JavaScript is a huge part of this, and every kilobyte of JavaScript you add, it delays the way the browser can show the page. So actually, put it quite simply, JavaScript is hurting your core web vitals. So we came down to that we need some things done with JavaScript. We can't live without it. But every kilobyte of JavaScript must add value to what we do. So it's not just what each framework can do, but what is the smallest framework that can do whatever we need. So short comparison here. A few of the popular frameworks, and of course the Alpine Js on the top. And you can see on the file sizes that there's quite a big difference. I've included the uncompressed sizes too, because that's what the browser gets. So you might think that the gzip file sizes are not that big of a problem, but every time you add kilobytes of JavaScript, the browser needs to compile that too. So, as I said, the modern frameworks like Vue and Angular and React, they're really nice. They come with a great development experience because we have this declarative syntax that reduces complexity in our code. We have the directives like vf, vtext, vbind, and all that to compose how the interactivity should be working. And that makes us do less DOM traversing. We don't have to look up all kinds of elements in order to attach different interactivity. So Alpine Js offers you the reactive and declarative nature of big frameworks like Vue or React, but at a much lower cost. So you get to keep your DOM and sprinkle in behavior as you see fit. So it's basically a Vue clone, just without the overhead. So it works just like all the similar frameworks. So instead of vif and vtext, we have xif, xtext, and etc. So it's simple to install. We add a script tag containing the library itself, and then it just works. And we could also put it in our NPM bundle if we were using something like that. So we sprinkle in interactivity where we need it. So if you have a markup parcel somewhere where you need to have something happen when you click something, it's just a few directives in the markup, and then it just works. And every time it gets too complex to just put all your scripts inside of HTML attributes, you can refactor to components in your code instead. So instead of having a script file where you first query for the specific node that should be the home of your app, you simply add the xdata attribute to the element that should be the root of the component. You could also use xinit if you don't need any data. You just need to run some code whenever Alpine Js finds the element. And the benefit of this is that it's all in your markup. You don't need to query in another file for which elements to work on. And that lessens the context switching, where you don't have to move between your Vue and your JS files and maybe your CSS files if you're not using a utility-first approach for that either. So a lot of people compare Alpine JS to Tailwind CSS and call it the Tailwind CSS for JavaScript. And I can see why, because with Alpine JS we don't get any finished solutions for different problems. It's basically just a bunch of utilities that we can mix and match to our needs. And while Tailwind CSS lets us write less CSS, Alpine JS lets us write less JavaScript. And as we all know, the less code we write, the less bugs we make. And the built-in benefit of this is that we get the same approach towards interactivity across projects and teams, and all projects are easy to get going with when you just get thrown in. So the documentation comes out of the box, and the easy part is that when we hire a new developer or put a new developer on a team, if they don't know Tailwind CSS or Alpine CSS, they can go through the documentation, and we have everything documented there, and they can somewhat get the idea of how it works almost immediately. So as I said before, the syntax is familiar if you're using Vue. In Vue, we have this v something for doing all kinds of things. In Alpine, it's the same, just with an X instead. And I think there's actually a config, so you can have it as a V if you're really tied to that one. So this is how you install it. Simply add the script tag to your HTML file. And this is probably not the best idea because you should self-host this and know what version it is. But you can do like this if you just need something quick. So as I said, simple stuff should be simple. In this example, we have an, let's see if I can make this work. Yeah. So we have a button here, and whenever this clicks, I want to show this div. So we start up our component here with the xData, and we set the default state of open to false. And then we have the xOn attribute here, where we listen for click events. And every time the user clicks this, we set open to be the opposite of open, which would be true. And when it's true, then we get xShow to kick in and show the div. So if this is fine as long as you're keeping it simple. But sooner or later, you'll get components where it's not simple. And this is a simple example. So we can listen for Alpine to be ready for getting code, and then we can define the components in our code instead. So we have this Alpine data method here, where we define the toggler component. It has the open state, just as you saw before, and we have a toggle method, just to get a little bit more complexity inside. So we reference the toggler element up here in the data attribute instead, and then it works from here. So this script down here could be right next to the element in our markup, or it could be in a bundle if you'd like. So that's all up to you. And it could be if you need transpiling of the script or something like that. It's hopefully not needed that much anymore after IE got killed. So a typical project or task that we would be to do a Hamburger Navigation, with the click the burger icon, and then it opens up the content. So before using Alpine Js, we would do it something like this. We would have some markup, and we would have some scripts for doing it. And I need my mouse again. So in vanilla JavaScript, you first query for all the elements in your burger navigation. And for the toggle element, you would add the click handler here. Detect whether or not it's expanded already, and then set the area expanded attribute so we get accessibility. And if accessibility is one of your perks too, then you should stay here for Jemima's talk. So we set the area expanded attribute to be the opposite of the current expanded state, and then we toggle the display value to in CSS. And just because we want to be nice to users, then we add an event handler for touching the escape button on the keyboard. So whenever we do that, we trigger a click on the toggle button. So a bunch of lines of code for something that should be probably simpler than that. And I didn't even have all situations inside of it. So in Alpine JS, this is a lot more simple. We simply add 5 attributes to our markup in order to do exactly the same thing. So I've kept the classes up here so you can remember which element was which, but they're not needed for this. So we have the xData holding our state, and are using xOn to listen for key down events. We can add modifiers to these click handlers or other event handlers. So we want to listen for escape key presses, and we want to listen for them on the window object. So every time I press escape, it sets open to false. And then also I bind the value of the area expanded attribute to be the same as the open state. So this automatically toggles area expanded for me. So on the hamburger button down here, when you click, toggle the open state, and the content will show when it's open. xShow toggles the display value in the CSS, and there's also an xIf if we need the element to be completely outside of the DOM. So, short demo. And the Wi-Fi is working, so I can click here, open the hamburger and see what's inside. And I can also press escape to exit the full screen view. Let's see if I can get it here. I can't. No, you just have to trust me that it works. So it comes with two-way data binding too, and we can see here how it updates values. So in this element, I have a count property on my data object up here. And for each click on the minus and the plus, it updates the number in here. So I can go click over here, and it simply updates. And I can use this as a stepper component if I'd like. Should probably add some trigger some events afterwards to let the browser know that I've updated a field in here. But next on, Alpine also comes with state management built in, so I can add a store for this if I need other parts of my page to know what the counter is at. So in this example, I have this part down here. I have another component. Oops. Where it actually doesn't have any data, but it just shows some text taken from the store down here. We define the store using alpine.store, and I set the name of the store and the value. The value could be an object too or an array, but the simplest way of showing it is just a single value store. So instead of having a data model up here, because I only need to update the counter value, I simply need to just add the xData attribute to let Alpine know that there's something in here that it should control. So I update the counter value on the store instead, and I show the counter value on the store. So I can click up here and down here, and it updates in both places. So next part. Just a small side step here. Alpine comes with a plugin for handling persisting values could be local storage, could be cookie storage, could be your own storage. It has a simple API so you can implement your own. But the gist of it is that it starts on one here because I tested it yesterday. As you can see over here, we wrap the value with this $persist. This tells Alpine that it should create storages on local storage by default, where it should save the value. So if I click this up, and let's just say 7, let's say 10 because of Umbraco 10, and I rerun the code pen here, it starts at 10 again because it fetches the value from local storage instead. So this makes it incredibly easy to do something that before would require a lot of scripting and handling of different edge cases working with these different storages. Another cool part of it is a quick show of hands. How many of you are used to Vue before? A lot. So you probably know the transition API in Vue, and it's quite similar in Alpine Js. The simplest way is just adding the xTransition attribute, and then you combine it with xShow to let Alpine know that something should be shown, and then transition in. So I have a simple example here. I have the open state again. It's coming again from other parts. And when I click the button, we talk the open state. So this div down here below, it should show when open, of course, and we just let Alpine handle the transition. It comes with a sensible default for this. So I click open, and we can see, didn't know if you could see it. It transitions in, and it transitions both the scale and the opacity to make it look quite nice by default. But we can also add modifiers here, so I can say I would like to let you be able to see it completely, so let's set the duration to 5,000 milliseconds. And now it's a bit more slow. I can also control if it should scale or use opacity and where it should start from. But the coolest part about this is that it mimics the Vue transition API in a big way. So, and this is also where Tailwind CSS or utility first really excels, because I can add these other attributes here with which classes it should just simply add to the element. So you can see here that whenever the element enters, I need a transition class, ease out duration. These are basically just key values for doing simple CSS stuff. If you're used to more bespoke CSS, you would probably just have one. But in this part, I turn up the opacity from 0 to 100 and the scale from 90 to 100. And we can see it simply just works. In our markup, no need to add any custom scripts for this. It's a simple transition that we need from time to time. So another use for the event handlers and also for me to show how you can modify things is that you get really easy way to listen for keyboard events. So as you probably read on the slide, the focus styles are pretty crucial for keyboard users. And I remember the time where we just set star and then the focus modifier in CSS and set outline to none to get rid of all the ugly focus styles. And that's a really bad idea because keyboard users won't know anything about where they are on the page. So quick example on how we can fix this is that we simply add an element to our page where we listen for tab key downs and set a store that the user is using the keyboard right now to navigate. And whenever they click with their mouse or touch the screen, then we set the using keyboard to false again. And this can then be used in our CSS because we then on the body bind the class value to either not using keyboard or using keyboard, and then we can add focus styles specifically to what situation we're in. So we can add really obvious focus styles for keyboard users and a little more subtle focus styles for others. Another probably quite unknown feature of Alpine is that it's really great for simply just running some code in your markup wherever you need it. So this is an example I've used before using Cleave JS, which is a library for formatting input content. Think of phone numbers and the currencies and all that. The docs state that you use it like this. You create the new cleave element and you put in a selector for the element that it should work on. So this is supposed to go into your script file a long way behind the view file. So in your views, you probably wouldn't know that you're running cleave on these. And then you set the options for the library. So in Alpine instead, we simply add the xinit attribute, and then we create the cleave object in here. There's this $EL magic property, which is simply just the element that it's working on. So here we then have our orchestration in the markup. We can see whenever another developer gets in that this input field is using cleave, and it should be a numeral field. But I didn't have this slide on very long before Alpine made their own plugin for this, and it would probably work a bit better with Alpine. It adds a little less than 2 kilobytes to your bundle, and it can do all sorts of dynamic things working inside of Alpine too. So Umbraco and Alpine, Razor views and other server-side rendered apps really loves these declarative JavaScript directories because you can add them in your Razor views as you see fit. So an example here is if you need to filter a list of persons. We have a Razor loop here for looping through each person in a list of persons. And with Alpine, we simply add a text field for searching in this. We have the two-way data binding here with the xmodel, updating the filter value. And then for each person, we show them if the name contains whatever the user has put into the filter value. So, of course, if you have hundreds of persons in the list, you shouldn't do this. You should do some kind of server-side instead. But this is how it would look. I've got a list of some of my friends. And I can see here that whenever I search inside here, and I didn't do the to lowercase and all that, so I can't just type Hulk like this. I have to do it with a capital. But inside here, we could also add transitions, stuff like that. It would fly in like you had spent all week on doing this, and this took me 5 minutes. Another nice example of how Alpine JS works well with Umbraco is if you need to do a tabbed interface of something. So I put the ingredients down as you need a nested content property, you need an element type for each tab, and the most basic of that should contain a title and some content. And then, of course, a Razor view for rendering the tabbed interface. So it would look something like this. And here I didn't do any accessibility concerns because that would take up too much space. But the gist of it is that you have an active tab property on your component, which by default we set to the first tab in the list. I just use the GUID key on each tab from nested content. And then we have the navigation where we're using a razor, looping through each tab and show them. Whenever you click one of the buttons you set, which you set the GUID key of the tab to be the active one. And then we have the XIF directive down here. It's using the template tag, which is a standard HTML tag for doing things that shouldn't be in the DOM. So the browser and screen readers won't read this up when it encounters it until it gets actually into the DOM, and that is what Alpine is taking care of. So if you were going to be extremely accessible and cater for non-JavaScript users, then you shouldn't use the template tag. Instead, you should use xshow instead. But short demo. I used the most of the time on this on coming up with these GUIDs. But as you can see, I can click through here and the tabs are simply updating. And I didn't. I removed the JS tab up here because I didn't have any JavaScript else other than the directives up here. So again, you can come a really long way without actually touching JavaScript. So other possible uses for this is Ajax submitting Umbraco forms. I remember back in the time we had long discussion threads an hour on how to do Ajax submission on Umbraco forms while keeping conditions and validation and multi-page setups. With this, you can simply just hook in some of the attributes and it will just work. You can also use it to delay loading of third-party scripts. As it is right now, Alpine only works when it's kicked in, so you can simply put elements with xinit in and have them load all other third-party scripts. That would increase your page speed substantially, but also having the risk of having them not loaded at all if Alpine in some way fails. But the basics of it is that it's just utilities. You can use it for everything you want. I got a question if I could recommend a good Alpine Js slider, and I can't because there is none. You have to build it yourself or just pull in a standard library and initialize that with Alpine. So why is Alpine nice? And especially with forms, we let forms do what forms does best, and that's handling the fields, the conditions, validation, all the server-side stuff, bringing the user back to the page if something goes wrong. And then we use Alpine to orchestrate the behavior that the browser should actually do. So we don't have to invent a lot of things that forms already have. We just need to tell Alpine to take the request, send it through Ajax, and handle the response. I had a longer code snippet for that, but I only have 25 minutes. So what do I love the most about Alpine JS? Mostly the transition API. We work with Tailwind CSS, as I've said a few times, and it works really well with that. We can do everything we need. Alpine JS also comes with a plugin for quickly spinning up intersection observers, so you can actually have things transition in whenever you reach them on the page. That got left out, but hit me up in the bar, then I can show you how it works. It's perfect for event handling, state management, and it actually has a DevTools plugin too, so it's easy to work with on a day-to-day basis. So where is this good? As I said before, CMS-driven sites that doesn't have any other JavaScript framework already. Could be WordPress, could be Drupal, but of course Umbraco is the one we work with. Also static site generators like 11t and Hugo and all those that aren't based on any other frameworks like Nuxt and Next. And of course when doing quick proofs of concept in CodePen. I'll skip the alternatives, you probably know the most of them. So summing up, it's easy to get going. You can sprinkle in interactivity wherever you need it, and it stays out of your way when you don't need it. It's very mature. It's at the third major version released last summer. It's got a growing community, and try this the next time that you need to add some interactivity to your pages.
Thanks.